Hello, everyone. This is the SIG PM meeting for February 26th, 2019. It is a recorded meeting that will be on YouTube, on all that good stuff. So please be mindful of what you say and be sure to adhere to the Kubernetes Code of Conduct. That said, Lockie, you mentioned something pretty cool. The SIG architecture meeting, first and foremost, if you had not gotten a chance to take a look at that, the SIG architecture meeting from last week kind of discussed a lot of really interesting things about, how we build teams in our community, how we try to figure out what the priorities are, and how we try to build process around making sure that people don't get burnt out and making sure that we can scale the organization that is Kubernetes as a project or as a program or a product. So Aaron, hello, Mr. Sigbeard. If you want to chime in a little bit about that, that'd be cool.
Oh, I don't know that I have a ton to say about that. It was a wide-ranging and philosophical discussion, and I, as always, am a much more pragmatic, action-oriented individual. So I think if I take anything away from that, it's that regular, repeated grooming of everybody's backlogs is necessary so that we can highlight and bring visibility to what work is out there that needs to be done and who is doing the work so that we can avoid burnout of individuals and we can make sure that we as different SIGs are actually doing the correct work and also making it easier for others to volunteer. Like this is something that SIG Cluster Lifecycle has done phenomenally well, and I asked Tim St. Clair to finally document the process that they've been tribally using amongst their end sub-projects. So they have at least something that you could use as a template to spread across other SIGs. And then I raised the point that SIG PM would be willing to offer like grouping services for some of these horizontal SIGs, such as architecture and others. Though I will say, just injecting my personal opinion in that, I feel like it is unfair and impossible to have somebody be an effective grouper and prioritizer without sufficient subject matter expertise in the area in question. This is especially what makes SIG architecture so ridiculously complicated because there are a wide variety of strong, competing, diverse opinions that come from a variety of different subject matter areas. And so it can be difficult to understand what is actually more important than other things. But I think that so long as we can respect individuals who keep us on track and keep us honest, that we could all collectively benefit. This is actually not that dissimilar from a rant I went on at the Kubernetes Contributors Summit in KubeCon, where I said, please, we are all horrible project managers. We need your help, which is why I am showing up to this SIG to try and continue to facilitate that discussion. I think one other thing that came up for SIG architecture, I don't know that it necessarily works for all SIGs, is the idea that a face-to-face discussion should not be the first time that you are talking about a particular problem. Although I appreciate that these meetings are high bandwidth and great for us to get some quick feedback, oftentimes in SIG architecture with highly bandwidth constrained individuals, it seems to make more sense to not even entertain something on the agenda until there's been an honest, genuine attempt to discuss it in the mailing list. This has the benefit of preceding the discussion, possibly resolving it before it happens in the meeting, and also allows us to have the decision in written, documented form as we look to establish some kind of case law so that we can take all of this expertise about the state of the project and the state of our decisions and hand those down to other people. I could keep going, but I'll stop there.
Thank you, Aaron. So for everyone who is on the call right now, can you do me a favor, pop onto the agenda, which I just linked in the chat. If you are attending, pop your name in the agenda. If anyone is available and interested in taking notes, that would be super awesome. Just name yourself and start scribbling. So based on, so definitely on what Aaron said, one of the hardest things to do is have context around this, around project grooming without being involved in being involved in the project day to day, or being involved in the SIG or whatever organizational group day to day. So I suggested this on the most recent SIG, the most recent steering committee, and the previous architecture meeting around SIG PM handling project grooming for some of the horizontal groups. So things like SIG PM itself, SIG architecture, and steering. And I think that the people involved have the appropriate context to be successful there. So I think that's a good start in at least piloting what's happening. So to give you an idea, SIG PM, so for SIG PM tracking wise, we have the KEP implementation tracking board, which includes the work items for the MetaKEP 1A, which we've been working on for the last quarter or so. The KEP tracking board itself, so actually tracking KEPs. So this is tying the KEPs and their states. I actually had a discussion with Matt Farina yesterday, he mentioned that he had some interest in helping out with that. So I think this is a good dovetail of SIG PM and SIG architecture, where we have people who have the appropriate context around some of the KEPs working on actually managing the grooming for that. To the project tracking and grooming end, I've created a project board maintainers GitHub team, which it won't immediately give access to give write access to all project boards, but what it will do is allow people who are interested in having their boards maintained by SIG PM volunteer and add that access to their board. So there have been a few project tracking and grooming issues that I will link. Go for it, Aaron. Was that a hand raise?
Oh, no, I was just waving to Craig. That's all.
Oh.
Just
and
to
I was
say in
waiting
general,
for the colleague walked by.
just in general, like I'd love for everybody to open up their boards so that everybody can write to every board. That would empower our contributors to actually move cards around. I get to see a number of private boards that you don't get to see because I am a GitHub admin. I'm one of 6. And people, if they don't pay too much attention, can accidentally create a private board that nobody else can see, that nobody else can shuffle cards around on. And that seems like that's not very inclusive and doesn't facilitate or encourage contribution.
So yeah, so given that you're an admin and can see all this stuff, I wonder, I can poke around on my own orgs, but I'm wondering if there is a way to set the default visibility for a project board, an org level project board.
There is not. Awesome. I cannot change the default radio button settings that appear when any contributor creates a project board.
Okay, it's either contributors can create boards or they can't, right? I think that's the setting.
I believe that is the setting, yes.
Yeah, so I think it's set in Parabolus or Parabolus or however we're pronouncing it.
That doesn't even set that. This is just, I think this is a manually thing that has been set across the orgs.
I think it's a field in the team config for Parabolus.
Okay.
I could be wrong though.
I also could be wrong.
So anyhow, for everyone listening, like the idea is that we're going to kind of jumpstart this process by using SIG PM and SIG architecture and steering as the guinea pigs, so to speak. The people who are currently listed as project board maintainers are myself, Caleb, Ehor, and Jace. So Jace has been doing the KEP tracking board and the overall architectural tracking issues and maintaining the repo and the boards within that repo, including the API review board. We recently brought the API review board from Jordan specifically worked on updating the process around doing API reviews. So a few niceties in that process, and then also taking that board from a architecture tracking repo level board to an org level board. So that's viewable and not everyone can mess around with it, but the API reviewer and API approver teams can move around on that board. So overall, I think that I have linked this issue now. No, I haven't. I'm doing that now. So there isn't, and my paste button is not working. This is awesome.
I do want to say one other thing out loud, if I can, on that point, because one of the key things that we were trying to raise in SIG architecture is the fact that there are very few individuals who are actually committed to doing the work. And oftentimes it seems like it's the same individuals who are showing up in all of the different places doing all of the work. And I feel like I fully recognize this is the pot talking to the kettle, but like all of the names that Stephen just suggested for this grooming are names that are actively involved in a lot of different areas of the project. And I feel like the only way this is going to be sustainable is if there are people who aren't also chairs in 2 other SIGs doing this work. Just a suggestion.
Yeah, so to that end, I've seen a lot of people recently mention their interest in getting involved in SIG PM. I think this is an interesting opportunity too. What I will say is that there are things that we have yet to document around our process. And to that end, we are working on a SIG PM charter, right? Our revamped, new and improved charter. So that charter, we're still hoping to get that out by the end of the week, at least have it up for initial review for the end of the week, and we'll share that out on the mailing list as well as blast it wide on GitHub and all the good usual places. So that is coming. What we're going to do this time around is, instead of organizing around these product program and project management areas specifically, we want to dial a little bit more deeply into the specific subprojects that we work on. So things that are actually tangible to people looking at SIG PM from the outside. So, you know, one of those things definitely is the KEPS process itself, right? And everything that is kind of organized around maintaining a KEP, maintaining the process itself, moving things from provisional to implementable, making sure that we have appropriate reviewers and approvers and things like that on KEPS. Like, that will be its own sub-project. End user engagement, so the CNCF end user community, how we engage with that community, how we bring our interests to that community, and how we also take their feedback and turn that into actionable intel for the project. That will be another item for the charter. External communications on the whole. So this is marketing, doing surveys, how we do release communication. All of that will be its own sub-project. And then finally, project management and how we handle grooming for the Kubernetes project will be one of the final bullet points. So if that sounds good to everyone, if people have suggestions, comments, concerns, please let me know. This is definitely in its nascent phase, so feedback is appreciated.
Again, other than that sounds like a lot of sub-projects for not too many people at this meeting. I look forward to hearing about the staffing plan to beef that up. My personal experience, I've had a great time working with Lockie and Claire and Kendrick and Craig over the course of the release, I think, as have maybe you, Stephen. And I think if they're interested, these are great places for them to participate and contribute, because the release definitely involves sweeping across the project and kind of keeping track of things, which to me sounds an awful lot like the KEP process and the project management stuff. And as we look to trying to put together some kind of cohesive marketing strategy for the release, kind of lines up with external comms.
Yes, so that's kind of that's kind of where it was, where the thought was born from. We're thinking that moving forward in the release process, that we try to seed both the enhancements lead and communication coordinator roles from SIG PM, as opposed to having them be from SIG PM and having them be liaisons into the release team, as opposed to things that people that are staffed from the release team that may not have the appropriate context. So staffing, yes, all of those people who were mentioned, I believe have some level of interest, and that's why they're on the call, but feel free to correct me, Claire and Kendrick and Lockie and anyone that I might have missed.
I just want to give a strong +1 to seating from SIG PM, because I did not have nearly enough context on the CUP process this time around that would have been really useful.
That's okay. For what it's worth, nobody did, and it didn't even belong to SIG PM until I fought to push it here, because it kept ping-ponging around between SIG architecture, SIG release, and SIG PM. And Stephen happens to be in all three places, so now there's one place.
I guess I disagree a bit with the assertion or the characterization of it ping-ponging. It has been a process more or less centralized around myself. It remains so in its new place. It was in its previous place, and will move out of that unfortunate position soon, where as we have more definition around what the KEP process is, and more and better defined positions for people to actually staff long term. But thanks for that administrivia, Aaron.
Sure, that's fair. I apologize for not calling out the technical work that you have been doing for KEPs, and the fact that you initially proposed them however many years ago it's been now.
So yeah, so I think there's a delineation between who handles the KEP process or who owns the KEP process, and just to, I think, clarify Aaron's point a little, who handles the KEP process and who maintains that, and who actually reviews KEPs for the wider project. And so the idea is that a Kubernetes wide KEP should have some oversight from a body that understands the process and and the way that we intend on maintaining code for the project overall. So that was SIG architecture, and the people who should be maintaining the process is SIG PM. So I think the confusion for people was who maintains the KEP process and who maintains the KEPs that fall into the process. And that was the ping-ponging thing, so to speak. But we've officially said, like, this is all on SIG PM with working together with SIG architecture as needed. But yes, SIG PM owns KEPs. It's recorded now, right? Great. All right. So on the KEP process, we recently merged an update to the KEP template. So that makes it a little easier for SIGs to actually file KEPs, understand what content needs to be in a KEP, and what content the release team specifically would be looking for when filing a KEP. So there's a release team checklist and some of the expected documentation, whether it be around graduation criteria, test plans, documentation for the user-facing sites, as well as for developers who may want to work on the enhancement. All of that has been laid out in the KEP template. What we've also done is captured a set of feedback for the KEP template and how to kind of iterate over that stuff. That issue is, I will pop that issue in the agenda as well. So after chatting with Matt Farina, he is interested in seeing how he can help out with this stuff. And I was like, the next thing we need to do, or one of the many next things that we need to do, is update the repo documentation, right? Make sure everyone understands what they should be looking for. Yes, Aaron?
I feel like maybe, would it be productive to have this discussion in the context of the KEP board? Like, I feel like everything you're talking about is pertinent to the implementation of the KEPs. And so it would be a good opportunity for us to make sure that the board has the right issues on it and that they're in the right columns and that they're sorted and prioritized accordingly.
Sure.
You are free to run your meeting however you want.
All right. Well, no, that's fine. So here's the KEP implementation tracking board. So this is basically a breakout of some of the work described in the meta KEP implementation KEP. So what I was mentioning is the capture and iterate on KEP template feedback. And Matt was interested in figuring out how he can get involved and help out. So I said, well, this is a lot of the feedback that we've captured from working on merging the new KEP template. If you want to pick up some of that feedback and try to actually either capture it within an updated version of the KEP template or updated documentation within the enhancements repo, then that would be super valuable. So let me assign that to Matt. Right. And part of the reason I said that is because he's got a few action items on this himself. So it would be nice to get another lens instead of the usual suspects writing the documentation. So
I actually talked with Matt this morning about this, and we're going to work closely on staying in sync together. He's already looked at or taken a brief look at the tooling that's being developed, and we're working on ways he can help accelerate that development.
Awesome. So additionally, like we were having a chat about, we have this idea, so we want to start doing grooming for the KEPs on the whole and the people who need to review KEPs. Does it make sense to have a KEP tracking board? Was one of his questions.
So this gets to, I guess, one of the concerns I had raised in the SIG architecture mailing list about where the KEP content should live itself, and separating that from where we do enhancements tracking. So you can take some advantage of the out-of-the-box GitHub automation around project boards, because with the stream of API objects, issues, and pull requests being mixed, it makes it difficult to do that automatically. Like, we have to now build automation that understands the difference between an issue and a pull request, or have some other convention that issues are only about KEP I don't know. We have to have it makes it more challenging to figure out how to spin up a project board that's useful. I believe.
Right. No, and that was that's kind of where I was at too. I was like, I don't have a good answer, because like, one of the questions is also like, who is the audience for this board? Is it in the context of the release team? Is it for every SIG who wants to look at the KEPs they need to maintain? Like, are we going to track the enhancement issues themselves as they currently exist? Or are we going to track the KEP PRs? Right. Tracking the KEP PRs is harder to do. Mixing the two is even harder, especially if we don't understand who the audience is going to be. So, like, I'm curious what people's thoughts are on that.
I mean, some of that we've talked about, like moving the enhancements tracking to a pull request based system itself, to help with the fact that issues more or less are just lost immediately after they're closed. So I guess it would be, perhaps we could focus on some of the intermediate steps required to do any sort of automation, or any sort of project board work, like grooming, or discuss those.
Yeah, so one of the steps that kind of like jumps out at me is the way we currently do release tracking or enhancement tracking for the release process is for some human, currently Claire and her team, to go through the set of enhancement tracking issues, try to glean what the status is on the KEP and on the overall movement, and then put that in a spreadsheet. But like one of the things that I think we would have to do is drain the set of issues that currently exist if we're going to move to a PR-based tracking system.
So where would the list of issues slated for a given release come from?
It would come from pull requests against, at least as I've conceptualized it in my head, you know how we have the release XY directories in the SIG release repository. I'm imagining we'd have something similar in what I've been calling the enhancements tracking repository. So you get on to, or you signal your intention to get onto the release train by filing a pull request to add yourself to one of those subdirectories in the enhancements tracking repository.
Okay, so it'd be like a YAML file that's a list of references to CAPs or something, right?
Yeah, I mean, really it'd be, I mean, once, you know, there's automation, it will be just the summary of a CAP and a link back to where the CAP lives, so that where the CAP content is. For now, I imagine just a flat file with a description, enough description, and the location of the CAP for the enhancement lead. So you know, people like Claire to understand, to make a decision about whether to allow the enhancement onto the train or not. So enough information that signals that the due diligence work has been already done by the person proposing or the team proposing the enhancement. In the future, in the near future, that a lot of that due diligence work can just be automated away. Like, you know, the sections exist, like a list of text that were added, changes to test grid, things of that nature. But that's as a place to start. You know, just checking in the existing content that would have been in the body of the issue, I think it's still forward progress, because we don't use them after the end of the release, and there's not the additional manual work necessarily of copying them into a spreadsheet someplace. Once they're like a collection of files in a directory, like listing, I mean, there are plenty of tools for doing that. So at this level of automation, I'm happy to throw my hat in to the ring to help deliver, because, you know, listing files is not all that much work in Bash.
Sure. I guess, so I just don't want to be the guy who always is like really conservative about it or whatever, but I try to think about what substantively can be done for consumption in the V1.15 timeframe. So what can be done in the next month, maybe even less than a month, if you wanted to give time to coach people on the new process. I would also consider the fact that having a lot of people try to touch the same file will generally lead to rebase hell and merge conflicts.
Yeah.
It is just one file, and it would just conceivably be a small group of people, but that's the only risk I see.
Right. So I guess I'm sorry, that was my mistake for not being clear there. The idea that it would be one directory. So each enhancement proposer would have their own file to try to minimize merge conflicts. Right. So okay. That if you got a release 1.5 subdirectory, like proposed subdirectory within there, like everyone's just making pull requests against the proposed directory. And so like what got merged by the enhancements freeze, if we decide to keep doing that, is the list of things that are going into the release.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense.
As like a thing we could do in 1.5.
Something I had hopes of doing to kind of approximate that for this release was to make sure that every feature issue had a machine consumable link to the CAP in it, so that a human wouldn't necessarily have to go scrape that list together. I haven't gotten that far, but I think that gets us to, either one of those, it gets us to a point where a tool can scrape the list of caps and populate a spreadsheet with that, or populate the site with that or something.
Yeah, I mean, I guess as I'm imagining it, there's no scraping together the list, like it's just what gets checked in. So working with the enhancements lead to propose your enhancement to the release is that process. So at the end of the enhancements freeze, we should have a directory that is accepted that has, 10 to 15 or so little files in it describing that enhancement with a link back to the cap. So it summarizes the cap and then provides a link back to the cap itself. And that's what gets checked in for the release. So we can either then generate a CSV like spreadsheet kind of view thing on top of that, or just collect those files and build some spreadsheet otherwise. But I think getting all the files in one place and having a process that's not just create an issue and you think it's good, I think are meaningful improvements we can roll out more or less immediately.
So we've got a few former enhancement leads as well as a currently release team lead on the call. What do we think of that overall as a iterative step forward? I mean, don't all speak at once.
Well, can you? I think out of that. Sorry, Claire, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say I think the plus I can see is for me as an enhancement lead. People were just adding things to milestones, and if I wasn't paying attention to the 114 milestone, especially leading up to enhancements freeze, things would get added to it. Enhancements freeze passed, and people still kept adding things to it. So if there was a way for like the enhancements lead to get, recognizing I probably could have seen more signals coming into my inbox, but hey, enhancements is so noisy that sometimes I don't have time to go through everything that comes in. If there were other ways to give the lead those signals that wasn't off of K enhancements.
Yeah, so right now K enhancements goes to my archive folder. It gets labeled, but it goes to my archive folder. It is quite noisy. So what I had done while I was enhancements or features lead was the tracked yes or no labels have no automation around them. You need to be a repo owner to be able to a repo write access person to be able to do that. That kind of doesn't, it's kind of not a good control anymore now that we have updated the permissions on the repo. So previously the contributors in Kubernetes release managers, as well as Kubernetes maintainers and enhancements maintainers were all had write access to the repo. We recently removed that. We recently removed write access from Kubernetes release managers and Kubernetes maintainers and added the milestone maintainers with milestone maintainers and enhancement maintainers as the two groups with write access to the repo. The reason for this being often when you're going in to edit enhancement issues, you need to be able to edit the descriptions of the issues. And if you're not the creator of the issue, you can't do that without write access to the repo. So we kind of determined that the best group of people who would need to do that would be milestone maintainers and made that change. But changing to a system where we don't have a vast amount of people, like 80 people with write access to the repo would also be great.
So I guess in chat, and maybe probably as an action item, Stephen or Aaron or Claire, perhaps you could schedule some time to work on a incremental step for 115 that addresses your challenges of, serving as an effective gatekeeper for the release process. I guess I have been tossing around this idea about the pull requests for a little bit now. So at least as you've described your challenges, I think that we get a lot of stuff for free moving to a file-based system. I mean, just moving the template that exists today into the repo and having people copy that into their pull request, or even moving that into the pull request, itself, the template itself, I think is either way gives us a meaningful improvement in everyone's lives.
Yeah, that sounds great. So I think that, you know, in addition, we also wanted to do an enhancements retro. So after we said that KEPs were going to be required for the release, there was definitely some friction there, and people had interest in doing an enhancements retro. Maybe we can combine these two efforts, and it sounds like it's going to be the same people in the room anyway. So
yeah, I just, to preserve my mental health and sanity, there is very little V115 related stuff I'm going to do, as I'm in the last month of V114. So I'm happy to provide my experience with ongoing management of V114 stuff as it exists. And I'm happy to review or take a look at prototypes or proof of concept. But in terms of driving things forward or advocacy, I can't offer any forward-looking time. It's the same thing where, like, I sure hope somebody else is thinking long and hard about cloud providers being out of tree and how we're going to create a release from things that are more than just the Kubernetes repo. Because I would hate to run a release where that's all being thought of on the fly. So this time where it's like a month out from the next release cycle is where I would hope that individuals willing to affect change are working on those proposals and have something to demonstrate along the way. Yeah. But I will help where I am able, if that's clear. I'm just trying to preserve my community.
No, thank you. That's the level of engagement I was expecting, certainly, as you are currently trying to get the release out the door. So yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I don't know if this is like a question that's best for SIG PM or if it's better in SIG release, but just out of curiosity, like, I know enhancements, like my leadship is more or less over after code freeze. Like, do we start thinking about like who's going to pick it up next and like working with them at like the end of the current release to fix problems for the next release?
yes, so there are actually there's actually a set of steps that I wrote up for succession for the enhancements lead handbook. They are probably not as up to date as they could be, but I know Kendrick sent an update to the handbook when he was working on it, so there should be more than what was there before. But yes, right now is quite is a good time to start thinking about who should be succeeding you and what they should be taking on.
I don't happen to know offhand when that is supposed to kick off. Do you? I feel like it's in some handbook somewhere.
So we don't have a specific timeline for that. What we've tried to do for the last few, well, I've been like release team HR-ish for the last few releases. So what we try to do around code freeze time is kick off that discussion and kick off a tracking issue for assembling the team. The discussion that should happen first should be on the release team lead roles, right? So the release team lead and shadow, as well as the leaders of each of the specific roles, should start talking about what the who should be succeeding them if they have appropriate successors, or if they plan on taking on the role for another cycle. That internal conversation should happen first, and then we should start talking about whether we continue with the survey, if the survey needs improvements, and how we vocalize that.
Okay, so sounds like sometime around March 7th or thereafter, we should start thinking about release team selection.
That sounds good. That sounds good. Speaking of shameless plug, around handling open source and dealing with multiple issues and burnout. Aaron, myself, and Paris and Noah, right? We're doing a panel for the open source leadership summit.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because I'm not busy enough.
So anyone going to that, if you want some in-person time, potentially, I'll be in California at least for the week of March 11th and the week of March 18th. So. Cool. So something else that was mentioned was out of tree tracking. This is kind of part of this conversation and part of a conversation that was had in the SIG release meeting. I believe the last SIG release meeting, most of the meeting was a discussion on how we should handle out of tree tracking. There were thoughts that this is a SIG PM concern as it's project-wide tracking. Some of the worries came up that, you know, we won't have, you know, as a SIG, we won't have the opportunity. This is coming from specific SIGs. As a SIG, we won't have the opportunity to present our work that happened within the quarter if we don't have an opportunity to put it somewhere like the changelog. My thoughts there were that the changelog is not the appropriate place to put stuff that is non-Kubernetes related, but there should be an avenue for us to do that. And you know, some of Caleb's thoughts, I know it's coming. I know. Give me a second. So some of Caleb's thoughts were that it's a privilege, not a right, to be able to be part of that release communications train, so to speak. And the requirement and the onus should be on the SIGs to provide documentation and updates at an appropriate time. Right, and you know, to be part of that communication, not for the release team to chase them down for docs or release notes or whether or not their enhancement is making it in and what the status is, and you know, even more so for things that are out of tree that currently the release team is not concerned with. I think overall it would be nice to be able to have our hands wrapped entirely around this process, but we're a team of a few people. The release team is a team of a few people. That's not entirely feasible. So we need to figure out ways to move towards that point. So anyone who has thoughts on out of tree tracking, feel free to shout them out. There's also an open issue discussing out of tree tracking that you can put your thoughts on that I will link in the notes. Aaron, go for it.
I was going to say, Claire, maybe did you want to summarize what we discussed in the release team meeting yesterday?
Yeah. So yesterday we did talk a little bit about this, and I think, if my memory serves not, because I'm not looking at the notes currently, but they did discuss like using blog posts as like another avenue for teams to sort of call out and highlight their issues, and leveraging like the different communication tooling there. And then possibly, I think it was at it, like a KubeCon or some other conference, you can say like, oh, if you don't check the blog recently, here are all the out of tree things that were shipped.
Yeah, that was the feedback. I feel like we discussed a couple of different ideas, but from the perspective of Caitlin and Natasha, who run the blog and also the Hype machine in general for Kubernetes, they felt like that was an effective compromise because, FYI, if you want to write a blog post, they're super welcoming of it because we kind of don't have a whole lot of those queued up. And B, that seems like a really easy way for us to just kind of round up blog posts that have happened since the last release. So seems like it's a pretty good lightweight way of encouraging people to use our PR machine or Hype machine, whatever, because there's more than just a blog, and they're willing to turn on all those levers to help out there. Because like my perspective is from the steering perspective, like we want to incentivize people to develop more things on their own time out of tree. I'm pretty sure it's less painful for contributors to develop out of tree. It's generally a more focused experience, and you are not necessarily tied to the release lifecycle. So we'll find out the blog posts, and rolling them up seems to be a good on-ramp to that cyclical hype cycle. But we want to encourage people to release on their own time when it makes the most sense for them.
Yes, but to touch back on an earlier point that you made, there are, we are moving towards a world, not necessarily rapidly, but with some speed, where what's in Kubernetes will no longer create a actual cluster for anyone. And so I think just as we need to be able to tolerate code submissions coming from outside of Kubernetes in a overall release process, we will need a generalized avenue for talking about those changes that occur out of tree. I think the run C vulnerability is another example where people are looking for guidance around things that happen that are required to make a cluster, but happen outside of the Kubernetes project. Run C is kind of a special case that is also a security vulnerability, but general external air quotes, external dependency information like etcd changes are, I think, also valuable to the downstream users of the project. So I would love for us to think of ways to accommodate those changes and integrate them into the overall process. I mean, so Core DNS, I guess, is a less security-related example, but certainly you will need to use a project that's developed entirely outside of the organization in order to get yourself a Kubernetes cluster. So, we need a way of communicating changes made in that project on some similar release cadence as the project itself, I believe.
Yes, I agree. And I'm not trying to boil the ocean here. That starts to get into the question of what a Kubernetes release even is and what are distributions and how are we keeping track of all of our third-party dependencies. And I don't think this is necessarily the right forum for that discussion. But I agree.
All right, so that's all I had personally. If people have additional topics, yes, Aaron, go ahead.
Hi. So can we go back to the board? I feel like we only talked about 1 or 2 issues on it, and I don't know what's actually happening on KEPS. My hope or dream is that I proposed it. I don't know if we ever got to the point where we could meet weekly and talk about where we are in the KEP implementation process. I feel like there's a lot of migration that has to happen, and there's a lot of iteration over the process itself that has to happen. And I don't know if that's actually, if anything is actively being done on it. Because again, to go back to people being super multiplexed, I know me and at least 2 other people, a couple other people are all involved in the release. So I don't understand how much time they have dedicated to move this ball forward. I know that Caleb is working on tooling, but there's just one open issue that describes create tooling. I'd love to know what the roadmap and progress is there. And then I feel like maybe at some point it would be great to, Kat heard the whole idea that design proposals are now KEPs, and we should do all of that migration as well. So yeah.
Yeah, so we have multiple issues that were opened in the past for different things around design proposals. So separating proposals and architecture-related items, disambiguating design proposals and accepted designs, cleaning up the design proposal directory, encouraging SIG blockades of design proposals directories. I think what could happen, and I've been trying to noodle on this a little bit, is that the people who are interested in contributing to SIG PM, so I spoke with Block A briefly about this, is potentially having a task force of people who are interested in SIG PM, who can work and maybe split across, break up between a few different SIGs that they would handle. Hey, it's a team of 5, and it's a team of 5, and each of you get 6 SIGs, right? And your job is to shepherd them into converting their design proposals from design proposals to KEPs and moving them and deprecating their SIG specific directory. That's just an idea. I don't know if that is something that we can easily move forward on.
I get that. I think my meta point is just, yo dog, I heard you like grooming, so maybe you could groom your board so we can groom while we groom, sort of deal.
So
I just don't know, like, does this board actually represent the state of today, and are people actually working on this?
So yes. So the revised KEP templates was the most, I think these were the most recent things that got merged in, right? Capturing and iterating on the KEP template feedback was just discussed with Matt to take some action items on working on this. So that is not in progress, but to do. I would say everything is up to date in terms of where the columns are right now.
And certainly I could give an update on the progress towards implementation. I think it's not been, I guess personally think it's super useful to do in a large group, but I'm happy to do so on an individual basis. I mean, I'm definitely planning. So yeah, like you're saying, Aaron, there's, you know, the work to get the tooling to a place where you can discuss like how should this work. So like what sections of a KEP should be required and when, how should a KEP move through transition, how are reviewers intended or expected to interact with the KEP process at all levels, SIG, API review, and enhancements tracking. And so I've been working towards laying a foundation that will allow us to iterate on those questions fairly quickly. You know, for people who want to follow along, there is, you know, there's an open source repository, but that's not particularly, I mean, unless you are well versed in doing that, you may not find that particularly helpful. Just, you know, looking at the code going in.
I've tried cloning it every once in a while and have had issues getting it up and running. And, you know, with my infinite spare time, I will definitely continue to do that. But I think I'm just like, pretend like I'm a new contributor. I don't often show up to SIG PM. I want to help move the ball forward on KEPs. But all of those issues on that KEP implementation board seem like really big and really deep, and like they require a lot of subject matter expertise. So I don't know how I can help. And I feel like it could maybe be a little more granular, or maybe I'm asking for some help wanted issues, or if I had some suggestions of my own, how would I go about interacting with this sub-project?
On the tooling, I don't think there's, at least for the next month or so, there won't be a bunch for a new contributor with no context to work on. In terms of things that one with some context could work on now, there is, you know, the conversion code that moves us from what we have today in terms of KEP content to new KEP content. There's work that Stephen's described in terms of deprecating the other design proposals, which I would really want to do iteratively. So I know there's like ordering issues there, but we've been talking about earlier about improving the enhancements tracking process. I think there's work we can also do on the API review process. Really, I guess if you were a new contributor looking for things to do, I would point you most likely to either the release team or the SIG architecture to learn how those people are working today, and helping to collect their input and drive small changes forward. So I've got like a large collection of things to work on as small things that drive these processes closer together. I can work on putting that into a list somewhere or adding them to this tracking board. I think that's certainly possible. I'll work to do that for the enhancement tracking next generation, at least as a concrete first step.
Yeah, so I think, so we'll also get a tracking issue up for enhancements tracking V2, 3, 4, whatever it is at this point. So Aaron, I think one of the difficulties around this and it is the fact that it's hard to do some of this stuff without the appropriate context, and only a few people have the context for being there for a while. I think that the breaking out into the SIGs to get some of that context in doing that design proposal work, conversion from design proposals over to KEPs, is a good opportunity. I don't want to put Lockie on the spot, but Lockie, do you still have interest in quarterbacking that?
Thanks for putting me on the spot. No, it's okay. Yes. No, I mean, sure. It's still, I look into these things and they are Pandora's box. So I'm trying to grok at how do I split them apart into smaller pieces, like Aaron was kind of saying, so that they aren't Pandora's boxes, because certainly there is the information required in all of our collective brain that you could probably split it apart and have something that's quite actionable at a smaller level. And, give us some more forward momentum, getting these out of kind of big things into smaller executable bits that show progression. I'd like to see some smaller flowy bits on this rather than the big stones that we have. And I don't know whether the lens to put over this is what is the next set of milestones for KEP that we should get through the context of a release, or through like what view is the most useful for KEPs, I think is interesting. And doing our milestones through that lens, because kind of the meta KEP thing with all its attributes to everything in Kubernetes is a very scary thing. So it's like, who is the KEP serving best, and how do we meet that needs as a consumer of the KEP right now? I think that'll prove the KEP process out. And, I think it's at risk, if we don't mobilize on this thing and help Aaron say, well, where are we with KEPs? Potentially bits of it dying on the vine here. More than you asked for.
No, I couldn't. You said all the words I wanted to say, but more eloquently. Like, my thing is, I have an invisible accomplishment monkey on my shoulder, which isn't as awesome as the Groot you have on your shoulder, Lockie. But like, these all feel like boulders or epics that aren't going to move forward very quickly. And I'd love to get that accomplishment high of like creating a couple issues and moving them across the board so we can make some progress. And I don't know if that involves like taking some of these and breaking them down and then moving them forward, or if there are smaller things that don't yet live on this board that should be put onto this board. It's just that sort of stuff.
I guess one thing to keep in mind is just in terms of expectations. Remember, what we're trying to do here is bolt on essentially an actually effective PMO to an organization of nearly 2,000 people, while we're, actually all, yeah. So
yeah, I know. Try and reverse engineer a coherent narrative out of an army of monkeys typing on typewriters, which are all writing on a herd of cats. I get it. It's not easy. I truly do.
But thinking about what I would tell, I guess, a new contributor with limited context as the first thing to be doing would be to increase the quality of the KEP content we have today. You go ahead, Aaron.
Yes. So I think for me, like, one of the next viable things would be how soon we could get to like having the tooling to a point where it could at least lint the KEPs, like, hey, make sure the right headings are in place or something, and then start to gate on that.
Yeah, I mean, if you want, actually, there's not, I would say you should just schedule some time with me, half an hour or so. That's more or less already done. But we should just talk. But for people who would have less context, the goal, at least my goal, is to do this with KEPs. So this is, these were the launch criteria, I used to fund projects, programs at DARPA. So the idea that, this project is to scare quotes technical, to apply planning to, I think, certainly if DARPA can do it, building space lasers and missiles that don't hit another missile in space. Certainly, I think we can for our own project. But this is what I guess what I would like every single PEP to be able to tell me is that catches them. You can take a look at that there. And the wonderful thing about using a Wikipedia is that you can translate it if English is not your first primary language. But that's the goal. That's my goal anyway.
So I would ask or plea or request if you feel that any of these issues are too large, and I agree that like in writing some of the stuff out, like it's like this is a massive undertaking for a few people. If you feel that way, say that on the issue. So like we can actually capture the feedback and iterate over it. Additionally, like this is not the only tracking board. There's also a SIG PM tracking board now that's that has some stuff that is not KEP related. So feel free to go into these issues, discuss, and pick something up if you feel that you have the bandwidth to do it. We have gone a few minutes over, but I think it was a super valuable discussion. I think that we're moving in the right direction, and I'm happy to have all of the people that are on this call contributing to it. So thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
See ya.